families, Dad knew his place. He brought home the bacon, while Mom fried it up in a pan. In many families, Father laid down the law, while Mom helped bend the rules. Wade Horn formerly served as Commissioner for Children, Youth, and Families under President George Bush. He is now the president of the National Fatherhood Initiative, an organization founded in 1994 to help restore responsible fatherhood as a national priority.
The reason why fathers matter is because they parent differently than mothers do. Mothers and fathers are not simply interchangeable parts in the parenting equation, but fathers and mothers parent differently. From the very beginning of a child's life, a father tends to be more physical with his children, a mother more verbal. A father tends to encourage more risk-taking and independence, a mother more caution and affiliation with the family. Mothers are seen as stronger comforting figures by their children, fathers as stronger disciplinarians. It's not that one is doing it right and the other is doing it wrong, but rather what children need to do well is both.
But over the last 3 decades, fathers have been disappearing from their children's homes and their lives. The numbers are startling. Studies indicate that in the United States, 1 out of every 4 children now lives in a single-parent home. And 70% of all children under 18 will spend at least part of their lives growing up with only one parent in the house. 90% of the time, that parent is a woman. Some experts estimate that over 30% of American children do not live with their fathers. Andrew Cherlin is a professor of public policy in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins University.
I think there's been a cultural shift in the U.S. over the last few decades toward a greater importance of individualism, of self-fulfillment, of being concerned with what makes you personally happy, and at the same time less of a concern with playing the roles the way you're supposed to, such as being a good father or a good earner. I think people are more concerned now about their own well-being, and that makes them a little less likely to marry and a lot more likely to divorce.
Fathers are important, economically and emotionally, to families, and many think their growing absence in children's lives is one of the most crucial and controversial problems facing American society today.
It's not just children that do poorly as individuals when fathers are absent. When fathers are absent from communities, communities fall apart. Because one of the things that we sometimes neglect to think about when we think about fatherlessness is it's not just that the father helps to socialize the child, but children help to socialize men. That is, when a man is connected to children and family, he is less dangerous and he is more responsible.
Fathers leave their children's lives for a variety of reasons. The steadily rising divorce rate, which has doubled since 1960, jump-started the increase in fatherless families. Divorce now creates more than 60% of all single-parent households. And while most fathers want to remain close to their children after a divorce, the realities of life often make that intention a moot point. Fathers often remarry and start families with their new wives, forcing the children from the first marriage to share dad with someone they hardly know. Men take new jobs in different locations and leave their children with the custodial mother. And as the children grow older, they often find it more difficult to leave their friends and activities to spend a weekend with dad in a different neighborhood or state. Linda Waite is a professor of sociology at the University of Chicago and has studied the impact of divorce on children.
Typically, men tend to lose contact with their children following divorce. In fact, a fairly sizable number, and that they lose contact the longer it's been since the divorce, the higher the chances that they will have very little contact with their children. So my recollection is that something like over half of all kids whose parents divorced 5 or more years ago didn't see their father at all in the last year. So it's more common than not for men to lose contact with their kids or to have very little contact with their kids after divorce.
Nearly 1 million children watch their parents divorce each year. Only 1 in 6 of these children will see their fathers once a week. And a decade after the divorce, only 1 in 10 children will have weekly contact with their fathers. Nearly 2/3 will have no contact at all. And when fathers are not around on a daily basis, children view them differently. Dad may become a friend, a confidant, someone who buys them gifts and takes them out to eat. Dad's not the one making sure the homework is completed or the chores are done. Dad sheds his role of disciplinarian and turns into what many custodial mothers call a Disneyland dad. Or Dad may become a stranger, someone who floats in and out of a child's life whenever it's convenient for his schedule. Andrew Cherlin has also studied the effects of divorce on children.
When I look at the effects of divorce on children, my conclusions are that in the short term, nearly all kids are very upset by a divorce. But if they're young enough, kids seem to get over it and have a period of not being too affected by the divorce. Some problems emerge in adolescence. And in adulthood, when we look at children whose parents have gotten divorced, we see a higher risk of some problems like mental health problems or not graduating from high school. And that's important, and we ought to be concerned about it. At the same time, the research suggests that most people are not harmed in the long run by a divorce in their family.
The age-old question of which is better for the children, divorce or staying in a destructive marriage where one partner is violent and abusive, is more easily answered than the question of should one stay in an unhappy marriage for the sake of the children.
It used to be the case that if you were married and you were unhappy and had kids, people expected you to stay together. That was certainly the case at mid-century. Now, if you're really unhappy, most people don't expect you to stay together, and in fact, you're in some sense expected to not stay together. And there's much more acceptance of divorce on the basis of a marriage not being happy or fulfilling. It's very hard to keep marriages together when the standard is not, are we raising children well, but am I personally satisfied?
Divorce also often plunges a child into poverty or drastically reduces his or her standard of living. Children may have to move from their neighborhood and change schools, leaving familiar friends and activities behind. Those disruptions, coupled with the loss of a father's daily influence, may prove just as destructive. Many take divorced fathers to task for being deadbeat dads, absent parents who offer little or no financial support. But many fathers are prohibited from seeing their children on a regular basis by angry mothers who use the kids as pawns in a battle against their father, or by mothers who just think the father is no longer an important factor in the child's life. Michael Eric Dyson currently serves as visiting Distinguished Professor of African American Studies at Columbia University.
The very fact that feminists have had a tremendous impact on the American family means that they bear greater responsibility for now some of the social ramifications of the policies that are a natural adjunct of what they advocate. So that means then if women are saying they want to be by themselves, rear their children by themselves, that old canard of jumping on a man for not being present simply doesn't fly. At the same time, I think that men, as they redefine their relationship to these women, have to be honest about what they want out of a relationship and what they're able to provide. But this is why I think the men's movement has gathered quite a bit of steam for men who feel that, listen, I'm a father, but I can't see my child.
Some women may be guilty of sending mixed messages to men about their role as fathers. They want the financial support, but are not willing to share the parenting duties. Today, 1 in every 3 babies born is born to a single mother. The explosion of out-of-wedlock births over the last 25 years and society's acceptance of the trend have also played a huge part in creating fatherless families. The stigma of illegitimacy may have evaporated, yet children born to unmarried women still fare far worse than those who enter the world with 2 parents. These children are more likely to fail or drop out of school, exhibit behavioral problems, suffer drug and alcohol abuse, become victims of child or sexual abuse, have problems with the law, live in poverty, and grow up to repeat the cycle. The children of teen mothers are particularly vulnerable.
It seems on every measure we can imagine, kids who grow up without an involved father in their lives do worse. Now, the question is, do fathers need to be living with their children to be an involved and committed father? Clearly, even if a father is not living with his children, it is better for that father to have a relationship with his children than not. But the likelihood of that happening is much less likely the farther we get away from marriage.
Although the rate of out-of-wedlock births has increased significantly in all races, the African American community has perhaps felt the biggest impact. In the 50s, only 22% of black families were headed by single parents. But between 1960 and 1990, that number jumped to nearly 65%. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, nearly 66% of all births to unmarried women were to African Americans. And 2 of every 3 African American babies born in the United States today are born to a single parent.
African American families have long had a greater strength in extended kin than white families have. African American families have long drawn more strength from grandmothers and uncles and aunts than have white families, which have been more focused on marriage. Traditionally, African American families have been less marriage-centered. That means that if a child is growing up in a single-parent family, in a black household, that means if a child is growing up in an African American household without a father present, there may be more people to provide support, such as grandmothers and uncles and aunts.
Michael Eric Dyson feels social forces have sometimes encouraged African American men to abdicate their presence in black families.
We know that old-style welfare used to penalize African American men for wanting to be with their families because one of the, pillars of AFDC was the absent father. So it ritualized the absent father even as it stigmatized and penalized them. So I think that what we're trying to do now is to see that the larger society in which we live, their social policies have in one sense punished the black family and made the myth of the black father a reality only to the degree that those black men were willing to be absent in order that economic resources could be present, resources that they could not themselves provide.
Dyson also believes that powerful literary and film portrayals of black men as absent and/or violent fathers have also helped perpetuate the stereotype.
I think this myth has to be rebutted by accenting present fathers, by acknowledging the fact that most black families have been intact. If we read Andrew Billingsley's book about the black family, one of the ingenuities of the black family is its adaptability. It's able to, to migrate its own family patterns to adapt to the social situation that it finds itself in. So the very thing that's the strength of the black family was often used as one index of its weakness. And I think that what we have to acknowledge is that the myth of absence is just that, and that black men have been present and powerfully present in the lives of their children.
Although the issue is often politically and emotionally charged, the problem of single parenthood in the African American community is a troubling reality. A study done by researchers at the City University of New York revealed that young black men raised in single-parent families on welfare and living in public housing are twice as likely to engage in criminal activities as young black men raised in two-parent families, also on welfare and living in public housing. A household without a father often fails to provide the discipline and structure a young boy needs.
There's an old saying in black communities, women love their sons and raise their daughters, which means that they demand responsible activity out of their daughters, but that they allow their sons to get over, especially when the father is not present. That they really that they coddle them and they cuddle them, and they don't demand the same things out of their masculine, their male children as they do out of their female children. That's still a backhanded compliment, but it's also a way of stigmatizing and demonizing the women who at least were present to provide nurture and care.
In all of your life.